Welcome back, America. It's Hugh Hewitt. Just got done talking to Michael Anton, and it's a great person to follow him up with is Senator Tom Cotton from the great state of Arkansas. Senator Cotton, welcome. It's great to speak with you.
Good morning, Hugh. Good to be on with you, as always.
Now, Mike Anton, who you probably know, just told me General McMaster isn't going anywhere, but there's a report in the National Interest this morning that they're looking to find him a 4-star, and John Bolton's going to be the National Security Advisor. What do you hear about that, Tom Cotton?
I have heard no such reports, Hugh. I obviously have the highest regard for both H.R. McMaster and John Bolton. I know that H.R. is doing a good job and intends to continue to serve in that role for as long as the president wants him to be there.
All right. Now let's turn to the budget, which I expect will get unveiled tonight. I'm hearing $716 billion as a top line that includes the OCO. Is that consistent with your briefing?
Hugh, I don't want to step in front of the President's State of the Union, but I'll simply say that for people like you and me and all our men and women on the front lines who were somewhat disappointed with the defense budget request last year, they're going to be much more pleased this year because it's going to be a budget that is based on the threats that we face and the strategy we need to counteract those threats.
Do you think it's going to have a path to 355 ships in it, which we have not yet seen, but the president repeatedly promised through his campaign?
I hope so, Hugh, and I believe it will. I think that's a target that we need to aim for, not because we're shooting at some arbitrary number, but because when you look at the threats we face around the world, whether it's China or Russia or rogue nations like North Korea or Iran, 355 ships of varying kinds and capabilities is really the floor that we need to counteract those threats.
Now, Senator, what do they call these trips when you go off with, in the old days, Mike Pompeo, nowadays with Mike Gallagher? What do we call those trips?
When the Democrats do them, we call them junkets.
Yes.
Whenever we do them, we call them congressional delegation trips.
Codex, Codex, congressional delegation. When are we going to get one to the Afrin region? Because I believe that what is cooking here is very bad. Anton confirmed it. Stavridis confirmed it for me. What's your assessment of the Turkish troops moving towards Manjib?
Well, unfortunately, Hugh, as I explained to my wife multiple times, when we go on one of these congressional delegation trips, they don't let us go to places like Manbij and Afrin, or for that matter, Donetsk and Luhansk and eastern Ukraine, as I've tried repeatedly. But you're right, as is Admiral Stavridis and Michael Anton, that the developments in Afrin and northwestern Syria are ominous. We have U.S. troops in the vicinity. We have some Kurdish coalition or forces that helped us defeat the Islamic State's caliphate. And now Turkey is beginning to move and threaten their positions. It is an underreported story, and I'm glad that you're covering it because it is a very sensitive and hour-by-hour, if not minute-by-minute situation. Now,
Mr. Anton said American troops would return fire if fired upon. Is that your understanding?
Hugh, that's always my understanding of what American troops face in their rules of engagement. On a battlefield, especially one as complex as the ones we faced in modern times like Iraq and Afghanistan and now Syria, American troops always retain the inherent right of self-defense. Obviously, we don't want to be engaged in any needless firefights with enemies, but especially with allies. But if in the confusion on the battlefield, American troops take fire, they will certainly defend themselves.
Well, that's something. Now, what's amazing is we don't have an ambassador to Turkey, and Admiral Stavridis brought this up. We need a special envoy, but we need an ambassador. We need an ambassador in Germany where Rick Grenell is not moving forward either. What is the deal with the Senate? Are they indifferent? Are your colleagues across the aisle indifferent to the national security implications of leaving key ambassadorships empty?
Well, Hugh, so many of the Democrats just seem absolutely embroiled to the so-called resistance. They are using every procedural trick to draw out and delay the confirmation of relatively uncontroversial nominees. Last week, we confirmed an Assistant Secretary of the Army 89-1. It's hard to imagine that we couldn't have done that by a voice vote. Likewise, ambassadors that are highly qualified, like Rick Grenell, to great power nations like Germany, in the past would have moved through the Senate with very little controversy. That's why, as you highlighted on your program, as James Lankford and Pat Toomey and I have stressed, that if the Democrats don't change their ways and return to ordinary practices and customs in the Senate, we'll have no choice but to change the rules that govern nominations so we can process the president's nominees in an orderly fashion.
Last question, Senator. On MSNBC yesterday, I stated I expected the president to do a victory lap on behalf of the American military who have defeated ISIS in Syria and Iraq. And Andy Card pointed out, look, ISIS isn't defeated worldwide. I still think it would be justified for the president to say, hey, we crushed them in the caliphate. Do you think that's justified?
Yes, Hugh, and the president, along with Secretary Mattis and Chairman Dunn, measured but appropriately praiseworthy towards our troops. We have, as General Votella said, defeated 98% of the Islamic State's physical caliphate, and he expects the mop-up actions will take weeks, not months. But they've also stressed that simply defeating the physical caliphate is not the end of ISIS, that they still pose a real threat in the virtual world through recruiting Americans to launch attacks or Europeans to launch attacks, but also elsewhere in Afghanistan and North Africa and so forth. So we should praise our troops, but we shouldn't think that ISIS is done once and for all.
Tom Cotton, good to talk to you, Senator. Thank you for joining me. Enjoy the State of the Union tonight and talk to you again next week.